Chapter 15. Lila went up the steps, reaching the porch just before the rain came. The house was old, its frame siding gray and ugly here in the half-light of the coming storm. Porch boards creaked under her feet, and she could hear the wind rattling the casements of the upstairs windows. She rapped on the front door angrily, not expecting anyone from within. She didn't expect anyone to do anything anymore. The truth was that nobody else really cared. They didn't care about Mary at all. Not a one of them. Mr. Lowry just wanted his money back, and Albergast was only doing a job trying to find it for him. As for the sheriff, all he was interested was avoiding trouble. But it was Sam's reaction that really upset her. Lila knocked again, and the house groaned a hollow echo. The sound of the rain drowned it out, and she didn't bother to listen closely. All right, she was angry. She admitted it. And why shouldn't she be? A whole week of listening to take it easy, be calm, relax, just be patient. If they had their way, she'd still be back there in Fort Worth. She wouldn't even have ever come up here. But at least she counted on Sam to help her. She might have known better. Oh, he seemed nice enough, even attractive in a way. But he had that slow, cautious, conservative, small-town outlook. He and the sheriff made a good pair. Don't take any chances. That was their whole idea. Well, it wasn't hers. Not after she found the earring. How could Sam shrug it off and tell her to go get the sheriff again? Why didn't he just grab Bates and beat the truth out of him? That's what she would have done if she were a man. One thing was certain. She was through depending on others who didn't care, who just wanted to keep out of trouble. She didn't trust Sam to stick his neck out anymore, and she certainly didn't trust the sheriff. If she hadn't gotten so angry, she wouldn't be doing this, but she was sick of their caution, sick of their theories. There are times when you must stop analyzing and depending on your emotions. It was sheer emotion frustration, to be exact, which prompted her to keep up with this hopeless task of rummaging around until she found Mary's earring. And there'd be something else here in the house. They had to be. She wasn't going to be foolish about this. She kept her head, but she was going to see for herself. Then it would be time enough to let Sam and the sheriff take over. Just thinking about their smugness made her rattle the doorknob. That wouldn't do any good. There was nobody inside the house to answer her. She already knew that. And she wanted in. That was the problem. Lila dipped into her purse. All those tired old gags about how women's purses contained everything. The kind of gags that hicks like Sam and the sheriff would appreciate. Nail file? No, that wouldn't do. But somewhere or other, she remembered, she picked up a skeleton key. It might be in the coin compartment where she never used. Yes, here's one, a skeleton key. Why did they have to call it that? Never mind. She wasn't going to worry about problems in philosophy now. The only problem was whether this key would work. She inserted it in the lock and turned it part way. The lock resisted. She reversed the motion. The key almost fit. But there was something. Again, anger came in her aid. She twisted the key sharply. It snapped at the handle with a brittle click. But the lock gave. She turned the doorknob, felt the door move away from her. It was open. Lila stood in the hall. It was darker inside the house than out there on the porch. But there must be a light switch somewhere along the wall here. She found it, snapped it on. The unshaded overhead bulb gave off a feeble, sickly glare against the background of peeling, shredded wallpaper. And what was the design? Bunches of grapes? Or were they violets? Oh God, it was hideous. Like something out of the last century. A glance into a parlor confirmed the observation. Lila didn't bother to go in. The rooms on the floor could wait until later. Albergas has said he saw someone looking out of the window upstairs. That would be the place to begin. There was no light switch for the stairway. Lila went up slowly, groping along the banister. As she reached the landing, the thunder came. The whole house seemed to shake with it. Lila gave an involuntary shudder, then relaxed. It was involuntary, she told herself, perfectly natural. Certainly there was nothing about an empty house like this to frighten anybody, and now she could turn on the light here in the upstairs hall. It had been papered in green stripes, and if that didn't frighten her, then nothing could. Oh, God, ghastly. She had her choice of 3 doors to enter here. The first led to the bathroom. Lila had never seen such a place except in a museum. No, she corrected herself. They don't have bathroom exhibits in museums, but they should have for this one. An upright bathtub on legs, open pipes under the washstand and toilet seat, and dangling from high ceilings next to the toilet, a metal pull chain. There was a small mirror, flawed and flecked over the wash bowl, but no medicine cabinet behind it. Here was the linen closet, stacked with towels and bedding. She rummaged through the shelves hastily. Their contents told her nothing except that Bates probably had his laundry set out. The sheets were perfectly ironed, neatly folded. Lila chose the second door, switched on the light. Another weak and naked overhead bulb, but its illumination was sufficient to reveal the room for what it was. Bedroom, singular cramped, with a low cot most suitable for a little boy than a grown man. Probably he always slept here, ever since he was a child. The bed itself was rumpled and showed signs of recent occupancy. There was a bureau over in the corner, next to the closet, one of those antique horrors with a dark oak finish and corridor drawed pulls. She had no compunctions about searching the drawers. The top one contained neckties and handkerchiefs, most of them soiled. The neckties were wide and old-fashioned. She found a tie clasp in a box from which it had apparently never been removed, and 2 sets of cufflinks. The second drawer contained shirts. The third held socks and underwear. The bottom drawer was filled with white, shapeless garments, which she finally almost incredibly identified as nightgowns. Maybe he wore a bed cap, too. Really, this whole house belonged in a museum. It was odd, and there was no personal mementos, though. No papers, no photographs. But then perhaps he kept them down at the motel, in the desk there. Yes, that was probably likely. Lila turned her attention to the pictures on the wall. There were 2 of them. The first showed a small boy sitting on a pony, and the second showed the same child standing in front of a rural schoolhouse with 5 other children, all girls. It took Lila several minutes before she identified the youngster as Norman Bates. He had been quite thin as a child. Nothing remained now except the closet and the 2 large bookshelves in the corner. She disposed of the closet quickly. It contained 2 suits on hangers, a jacket, an overcoat, a pair of soiled and paint-spotted trousers. There was nothing in any of the pockets of these garments. 2 pairs of shoes and a pair of bedroom slippers on the floor completed the inventory. The bookshelves now. Here Lila found herself pausing, puzzling, then peering, in perplexity at the incongruous contents of Norman Bates' library. A new model of the universe, the extension of consciousness, the witch cult in Western Europe, dimension and being. There were not the books of a small boy, and they were equally out of place in a house of a rural motel proprietor. She skirmed in shelves rapidly. Abnormal psychology, occultism, theosophy, translations of what? Justine, and here on the bottom shelf a nondescript assortment of untitled volumes poorly bound. Lila pulled out at random and opened it. The illustrations that leaped on her were almost pathological and pornographic. She replaced the volume hastily and stood up. As she did so, the initial shock of revulsion ebbed away, giving place to a second, stronger reaction. There was something here. There must be. What could she not read in Norman Bates' dull, fat, commonplace face was all too vividly revealed here in his library. Frowning, she retreated to the hall. The rain clashed harshly on the roof, and thunder boomed as she opened the dark, paneled door leading to the third room. For a moment she stood staring into the dimness, inhaling a musty, mingling odor of stale perfume and what? She pressed the light switch at the side of the doorway, then gasped. Ugh! This was the front bedroom, no doubt of it, and the sheriff had said something about how Bates had kept it unchanged since his mother's death. But Lila wasn't quite prepared for the actuality. Lila was quite unprepared to steep in and step bodily into another era. And she found herself there, back in the world as it had been long before she was born. For the decor of this room had been outmoded many years before Bates' mother died. It was a room such as she thought had not existed for the past 50 years, a room that belonged in a world of gilded ormolu clocks, Dresden figurines, sachet-scented pincushions, turkey-red carpet, tasseled draperies, frescoed vanity tops, and four-poster beds, a room of rockers, china cats, of hand-embroidered bedspreads, and overstuffed chairs covered with antimacassars. And it was still alive. That was what gave Lila the feeling of dislocation in space and time. Downstairs were remnants of the past ravaged by decay, and upstairs all was shabbiness and neglect. But this room was composed, consistent, coherent. A vital functioning entity complete unto itself. It was spotlessly clean, immaculately free of dust, and perfectly ordered, and yet aside from the musty odor, there was no feeling of being in a showplace or a museum. But the room did seem alive, as does any room that has lived in for a long time. Furnished more than 50 years ago, untenanted and untouched since the death of the occupant 20 years ago, it was still the room of a living person, a room where just yesterday a woman had sat and peered out the window. There are no ghosts, Lila told herself, then frowned again at the realization that it had been necessary to make the denial. And yet here is this room. She could feel a living presence. She turned to the closet. Coats and dresses still hung in a neat row, though some of the garments were sagging and wrinkled, though long lacked and pressing. Here were the short skirts of a quarter of a century ago. Up on the shelves, the ornate hats, the head scarves, several shawls such as an older woman might wear in a rural community. At the rear of the closet was a deep, empty recess, which might have been meant for the storage of luggage, and nothing more. Lila started over to examine the dresser and vanity, then halted beside the bed. The hand-embroidered bedspread was very lovely. She put out a hand to feel the texture, then drew it back hastily. The bedspread was tucked in tightly at the bottom and hung perfectly over the side, but the top was out of line. It had been tucked in, yet but quickly, carelessly, so that an inch of the double pillow showed, the way the spread it tucked in when a bed has been made up in a hurry. She ripped the spread down, pulled back the covers. The sheets were smudgy gray and covered with little brown flecks, but the bed itself and the pillow above it bore the faint yet unmistakable indentation made by a recent occupant. She could almost trace the outline of the body by the way the undersheet sagged, and there was a deep depression in the center of the pillow where the brown flecks were thickest. There are no ghosts, Lila told herself again. This room has been used. Bate didn't sleep here. His own bed offers sufficient evidence of that, but somebody had been sleeping. Somebody had been staring out of the window, and if it hadn't been Mary... Or maybe it was Mary. Well, where was she now? She could ransack the rest of the room, go through the drawers, search downstairs, but that wasn't important at the moment. There was something else she had to do first, if she could only remember. Where was Mary now? Then she knew. What was it Sheriff Chambers had said? They had found Norman Bates down in the woods behind the house gathering firewood. Firewood for the furnace. Yes, that was it. The furnace is in the basement. Lila turned and fled down the stairs. The front door was open and the wind howled in. The front door was open because she used the skeleton key, and now she knew why the term bothered her. It was because of the skeleton, of course, and she knew why she had been so angry too ever since finding the earring. She had been angry because she was afraid, and the anger helped to hide the fear of what had happened to Mary, what she knew had happened to Mary down in the cellar. It all was becoming clear. It was because of Mary that she was afraid, not for herself. He had kept her here all week. Maybe he tortured her. Maybe he'd done to her what that man was doing in that filthy book. He tortured her until he found out something about the money. The cellar. She has to find the cellar. Lila groped her way along the downstairs hall into the kitchen. She found the light, then gasped at the tiny furry creature crouched on the shelf before her, ready to spring. But it was only a stuffed squirrel, its button eyes identical yet alive and reflected over the headlights. The basement stairs were just ahead. She fumbled at the wall until her hand brushed over another switch. The light went on below, just a faint and faltering glow in the darkness depths. Thunder growled into counterpoint to the clatter of her heels. The bare bulb dangled from the cord directly in front of the furnace. It was a big furnace with a heavy iron door. Lila stood there staring at it. She was trembling now. She admitted that to herself. She could admit everything now. She'd been a fool to come here alone, a fool to do what she had done, a fool to do what she was doing now. But she had to do it because of Mary. She had to open the furnace door and see what she knew would be inside. God, what if the fire was still going? What if... But the door was cold, and there was no heat from the furnace. No heat from it within the dark, utter empty recess behind the door. She stooped, peering without even attempting to use the coal poker. No ashes, no spell, no smell of burning, nothing at all. Unless it's been recently cleaned. The furnace hadn't been used since last spring. Lila turned away. She saw the old-fashioned laundry tubs and the table and chairs beyond them next to the wall. There were bottles on the table and carpentry tools, plus an assortment of knives and needles. Some of the knives were oddly curved, and several of the needles were attached to syringes. Behind them rose a clutter of wooden blocks, heavy wire, and large shapeless blobs of white substance she could not immediately identify. Only a big fragments looked something like the cast she had worn as a child, the time she had broken her leg. Lila approached the table, gazed at the knives in puzzled concentration. Then she heard the sound. At first she thought it was thunder, but then came the creaking from overhead, and she knew somebody had come into the house. Somebody was tiptoeing along the hall. Was it Sam? Had he come to find her? But then why didn't he call her name? And why did he closed the cellar door? The cellar door had closed just now. She could hear the sharp click of the lock and the footsteps moving away back along the hall. The intruder must be going upstairs to the second floor. She was locked in the cellar, and there was no way out. No way out, nowhere to hide. The whole basement was visible to anyone descending the cellar stairs, and somebody would be coming down those stairs soon. She knew it now. If she could only keep herself concealed for a moment, then whomever came after her would have to descend all the way into the basement, and she'd have a chance to run for the stairs then. The best place would be under the stairs itself, if she could cover up with old papers or some rags. Then Lila saw the blanket pinned to the far wall. It was a big Indian blanket, ragged and old. She tugged at it, and the rotten cloth ripped free of the nails which held it in place. It came off the wall, off the door. The blanket had concealed it completely. But there must be another room here, probably an old-fashioned fruit cellar. That would be the ideal place to hide and wait. And she wouldn't have to wait much longer, because now she could hear the faint, faraway footsteps coming down the hall again, moving along into the kitchen. Lila opened the door to the fruit cellar. It was then that she screamed. She screamed when she saw the old woman lying there, the gaunt, gray-haired old woman whose brown, wrinkled face grinned up at her in an obscene greeting. "Mrs. Bates," Lila gasped. Yes, but the voice wasn't coming from those sunken leather jaws. It came from behind her, from the top of the cellar stairs. When the figure stood, Lila turned to stare at the fat, shapeless figure, half concealed by the tight dress which had been pulled down incongruously to cover the garments beneath. She stared up at the shrouding shawl and the white paint simply faced beneath it. She stared at the garnished reddish lips, watched them part in a convulsed grimace. "I am Norman Bates," said the high, shrill voice. And then there was the hand coming out, the hand that held the knife, and the feet were mincing down the stairs, and the other feet were running, and Lila screamed again as Sam came down the stairs, and the knife came up quickly as death. Sam grasped and twisted the hand that held it, twisted it from behind until the knife clattered to the floor. Lila closed her mouth, but that scream continued. It was the insane scream of a hysterical woman, and it came from the throat of Norman Bates.